Now, a year ago today, on January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden became the President of the United States. 1 year into his presidency, he has made significant progress on some agenda items, rolling back the legacy of the Trump era by rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and revoking a travel ban against majority Muslim countries. But many of his transformational proposals remain unfulfilled. In a press conference at the White House, Biden touted his administration's enormous progress in its first year and insisted he did not overpromise to the American people. He also acknowledged that the pandemic has left Americans exhausted and demoralized, but insisted that he has outperformed expectations in dealing with it.
It's been a year of challenges, but it's also been a year of enormous progress. The COVID-19 is not going to give up and accept things. It's not going to go away immediately. But I'm not going to give up and accept things as they are now. Some people may call what's happening now the new normal. I call it a job not yet finished. It will get better. We're moving toward a time when COVID-19 won't disrupt our daily lives, where COVID-19 won't be a crisis, but something to protect against and a threat. Look, we're not there yet, but we will get there. The Federal Reserve provided extraordinary support during the crisis for the previous year and a half. Given the strength of our economy and the pace of recent price increases, it's appropriate, as the Federal Chairman Powell, the Fed Chairman Powell, has indicated, to recalibrate the support that is now necessary.
I'm joined now on the line from Washington by Arise U.S. correspondent Eric Ham, and from Lagos by the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Foreign Affairs, Eghosa Osaghae. Gentlemen, good to have you here. And I'll start with you, Eric Ham. We have President Biden having 42% approval of his performance. What does that mean, considering what has always happened to previous presidents when they are here in office?
Well, it means that he's underwater right now. It means that what we're seeing is a president who is struggling to not only win the support within his own party, but also struggling to win the support of the American people. And this comes at a heady time when we know that this year the midterm elections will be in November. And so many within the party right now are anxious about the president's strategy going forward, but also anxious about their grip on power. And what we saw yesterday in that press conference from the president, his first of this year, is that this is a president who is not backing down from his strategy, backing down from his vision and his plans for what he wants to accomplish. In fact, what we're seeing from this president is simply a shift in how he will actually operate, and that he believes the only problem is he needs to do more engagement with the American people, getting outside of the White House, getting outside of that presidential and White House bubble. Long way in helping. But again, when you have a president who is unable to deliver on key initiatives of his own agenda, and also key initiatives that the base of his party wants to see, namely voting rights, the president has got to figure out a way to get around these hurdles, and otherwise we could see a demoralized party heading into the 2022 midterm elections.
And a lot of Americans, in trying to compare this administration, will say that Biden has brought some sort of dignity to the White House and restore some hope among Americans, especially when it comes to foreign policy. What would you say about that?
Well, again, what we're seeing with this president right now is there are a host of or a myriad of foreign policy challenges confronting this administration. Of course, the first and foremost is the issue of how the United States, NATO, and its allies will deal with a truculent Russia that many believe is imminent in terms of its invasion of Ukraine. In addition to that, the administration is also dealing with a bellicose North Korea that continues to launch ballistic missiles that, and the fight for global economic supremacy with China. So these are just a number of issues far-reaching issues, issues that certainly could be the one issue alone could be enough to overtake an administration. But what we're seeing is this administration has to deal with all of these at one time, ensuring that it's able to address many of the domestic issues confronting this administration. So this is an administration that is besieged on all sides right now. And what we're seeing here is a president who is trying to now retake the narrative, at the same time trying to assure the American that this administration has what it takes to deal with all of these issues.
Just stay with us while we speak with Osaghae. We want you to just give us the outlook from outside the United States. What do you make of Joe Biden's press conference last night as he tries to begin his second-year term?
Well, first is I think that the president has provided the framework within which his tenure so far should be evaluated. He's talked about the uncertainties of not only the domestic environment, but also the external environment. And therefore, I think that, in the last 1 year, he's had to deal with issues that were difficult to place under control. For instance, the COVID-19 pandemic and its tendency, to change course and change character. That pandemic has changed the face of the whole world. He's also had to face, emerging issues of security from different parts of the world, and he's had to face a lot of challenges from within America itself. Remember that, as you say, he has succeeded a president whose era was very turbulent, a president whose era seemed to and questions, over the capability of the American democratic system to address the kinds of issues that America has historically been believed to be able to deal with.
Interesting indeed. But there's this perception that Joe Biden is actually weak compared to the past American leaders, especially when it comes to global policy. And what would you say about that, Osaghae?
That's a matter of perception, which is not exactly, I think, in my view, correct. The strength of a president's character is not only to be seen in terms of the tendencies that you would see in one, which would be defiant, which would be very combative, as opposed to necessarily combative, but can be defiant and has a more, if you like, reconciliatory approach to dealing with issues. I think that, President Biden is a lot more reflective, is a lot more reconciliatory, and has what you might regard as, a more strategic approach to dealing with issues. And strategic approaches in general are not things that you take in one fell swoop. They engage processes as they evolve, but the sure thing is that, they are a lot more participatory, but as I say, they are more reflective, and therefore they would seem in contrast to a more combative posture that President Biden has inherited, to suggest some kind of weakness. But let me also say that the perceptions of weakness, perceptions of these ones were there even as election issues in the United States, so they are not new. But I'm sure that everyone would see that what matters at the end is the outcome, the possibility that you can meet your targets, your policy targets, and that you can have made. And so far, I think there's been some methodology, a little more systemic methodology to dealing with these kinds of issues.
I come back to you, Eric. President Biden is saying that he did not overpromise, and yet he seems to be under pressure to actually go out and meet the American people in 2022. He's actually said that he's going to be going out more from the White House to meet Americans and talk more to them. Do you think that this is coming because of the fear of the midterm elections?
Well, I do believe that is certainly one of the driving issues, and I think the president is actually hearing a lot from within his own party, particularly from those elected leaders and lawmakers about what's happening. In fact, tonight, the president will be speaking for an event at the Democratic National Institute. So I think what we're seeing here is a president who recognizes that the midterm elections are on the horizon and that his a loss in seats. And much of that, of course, will be attributed to this president, how much he's been able to get done and what he is focused on. And also, I think that's why yesterday during that press conference, we saw President Biden really go after Republicans. There were a lot of members of the press who were pushing on the president's agenda, pushing on whether or not he has delivered, as you said. But again, what we saw was the president really turned it around and put the onus on Republicans, asking what are they actually for. The president believes that his agenda items are items that the American people want. And if you look at the polling data, particularly like better legislation, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure plan, many Americans overwhelmingly support those initiatives. But what we have seen is a Biden administration who has simply not done enough in actually communicating directly to the American people about what has happened. In addition to that, the president recognized some missteps, particularly on the early withdrawal from Afghanistan, and of course, addressing the COVID pandemic, particularly this new strain of Omicron, where the United States is still grappled with making sure that all Americans have enough tests. But again, what the president is now doing is the president, I think, pivot to a political footing, and as opposed to his first year in office where he focused on being the legislator in chief. One other point that I think is also driving at least the optics of what we're seeing from the president and this White House, when President Biden was a U.S. senator, the president, as a U.S. senator, he went home every day. He rode the Amtrak train from Washington to his hometown of Delaware. And what we're seeing now is every weekend the president goes home to his home in Delaware, to his house in Delaware. The president needs to get out of this legislator who goes home every day. The president actually needs to recognize that while this administration certainly has done a lot, an enormous amount over the last year, Americans aren't necessarily feeling it because, again, they're gripped with a runaway inflation that is causing a massive in prices on food, gas, and other items. And so while the president certainly has done a lot, many Americans are still feeling a bit of anxiety over the rising cost of prices, as well as what does this COVID pandemic mean for children and schools in particular. Find a way to message that, communicate that to the American people, but also recognize his job is not simply courting himself off in the White House Monday through Friday and then heading home on the weekends. It's also messaging and making sure the American people understand what his vision is, what his plan is, and understand how he's going to help them deal with the problems that they're confronting.
And one would wonder, from the flip side of it, if there was no coronavirus pandemic in the first year of Joe Biden, how do you think he would have fared?
Well, look, the pandemic has certainly... I think this administration thought that they could actually deal with the pandemic by actually getting shots in people's arms. And that certainly makes sense. The United States certainly has more vaccines than any other nation in the world right now, more than enough to actually vaccinate all Americans. But the United States actually lags way behind other industrialized and Western nations in getting its citizens vaccinated. And so as a result of that, we have seen both the deadly Delta variant, and now the Omicron variant, which is now the new dominant strain in the United States, continue to push hospitals and other medical facilities. And the president initially attempted to try to deal with this by cutting off travel from 8 African nations, which was widely panned and criticized. But now when we see the White House attempting to try to catch up on testing, many are wondering if that was something this administration should have tried to focus on, as opposed to keeping people from African nations out of the United States. In addition to that, what we are seeing from this administration is mixed signals in terms of its messaging around COVID, which again is creating more confusion and frustration for the American people. And this is something that the administration has got to fix. So we're seeing an administration that is not only dealing with a rising case of issues, both foreign and domestic, but also an administration that still seems to not be able to find its footing on its actual messaging.
Right, and I'll come to you, Osaghae. Joe Biden has actually praised himself for doing very well when it comes to jobs. Isn't the key priority of an American president to provide jobs and boost the economy and all those sort of things?
Well, it goes without saying that it is the responsibility of the government, to provide a lot of this. But, these are, we've had recessions, economic recessions. We've had, very serious challenges in the area of job creation and even those kinds of stimulus packages, the kinds of incentives that you need to boost the economy. Now, for all such challenges, the ability to create jobs becomes a big score, if you like. So yes, it is the responsibility of government to provide employment, but in very unusual times, such as the times that the pandemic, has affected very adversely, you should be able to do that. Look, all over the world, there is serious problems with, very serious problems you find with employment rates. People are losing jobs. We've had those kinds of drawbacks. But in the United States, the kinds of incentives that had to go into boosting, employment all over again. The kinds of stimulus packages that went into private, businesses and so on. So to be able to maintain the balance, that you require in these kinds of times must be such a big thing. Again, that welfare is not something that, is such a strong point when you have those kinds of challenges and recessions. So on the whole, I think, yes, why not? In normal times, if you claim, job creation as a big thing, you may say, well, why not? But when these unusual times come,
just cut in here. I would want you to wrap this round the policy of Biden administration, especially as it relates to what some people call the hasty withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. How much damage has that done to Biden's reputation and that of the Democratic Party as they actually mark this first year, of returning to power after being out of government for long?
There's a saying that we have in Washington when we talk about politics, and that is a day in politics. And what that means is, while the initial withdrawal from Afghanistan was certainly chaotic, it was a massive failure, and it was just very painful to watch. And I remember being at the White House covering the administration during that first 72 hours, where you saw all of those Afghans attempting to try to board planes and people literally falling off planes in the air. And it was horrible to watch. And the president, once again, was at his home in Delaware, And you know, I kept thinking, like, where is the administration? The president needs to come back and answer our questions about what's going on happening. And again, what we saw there was, while that was certainly problematic, the administration did find its footing and then began to really administer a massive withdrawal from the country that many simply didn't think could happen, but they were able to turn it around. And so I think while that was certainly a blip on the radar in this administration's overall progress over the first year, I think many are going to look at the fact that this administration wound down America's longest running war that many people found unpopular, many people wanted the United States to get out of. I think he's going to be able to claim success. So there were some major problems that this administration confronted early on. But now that looking at it in hindsight, the fact that the United States is out, the fact that the president decided to actually allow the Taliban to run the nation and refuse to actually provide to the Taliban, I think many are going to see that as a win, not only for the administration, but also for the United States. As far as other confrontations, particularly on foreign policy, this is an administration, this is a president who certainly is a known quantity around the world. And we see the U.S. prestige now at the back of the president, particularly as he engages in this diplomatic standoff with Russia, as we see the European Union, NATO, and others.
As we try to round off this conversation, Eric,
president to face Russia.
As we try to round off this conversation, I just really wanted to find out what it means having the Taliban back in government after several years of being out of government. How is the U.S. taking that fresh approach, considering that this group of guys were declared terrorists? They were in several parts of the world, but here they were coming back and forming a government. How has the approach been like between the U.S. and the Afghan government, Eric?
Well, I think what you're saying is the approach now has been more engagement, more discussion, and actually bringing along partners. What you're seeing now is an administration that is actually operating in the normal chain of command on U.S. foreign policy, which is very different than what we saw under the Trump administration. U.S. allies, that's actually a welcome approach.
We must thank you so much, Eric Ham, Arise U.S. correspondent, for joining us on the show. And Eghosa Osaghae, Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, thank you so much for joining us.